The wedding ended in laughter, music, and the fading glow of string lights swaying over the rented hall. Guests carried the last of the champagne bottles out to their cars. Elena smiled and waved as her mother pressed a kiss to her cheek, whispering blessings in Spanish before leaving with her cousins. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a radiant new bride. Rosy cheeks, trembling joy, a lace gown fitted too tightly at the waist. But beneath the polished exterior, Elena's stomach twisted. All night she had danced to silence her own thoughts. All night she had avoided the one truth she could not erase. David expected purity, and she could not give it. Narration carried her into the bridal suite at the modest Texas home David had rented on the outskirts of town. The drive there had been filled with his talk of the future. "Our children will be strong," he had said, his hand resting proudly on the steering wheel. She only nodded, her palms damp against her dress. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and cologne. David carried her over the threshold with a laugh, kissing her neck as he pushed the door shut. For a moment, she wanted to believe in this new life. She wanted to believe love could bloom despite secrets. He poured 2 glasses of champagne. "To us," he said. She forced a smile. "To us." The glasses clinked. His eyes, pale and sharp, lingered on her as if she were a prize he had finally claimed. Elena's chest tightened. She thought of her mother's warnings, of the whispers among relatives that a husband's honor was fragile, easily shattered. He reached for her hand, pulling her close. "Tonight, Elena, we begin fresh. A life with no shadows." Her throat caught. "No shadows," he said. Yet her past was a shadow that clung to her no matter how she prayed. The lace gown slid to the floor, and the silence thickened. His touch was eager, expectant. Her body, Weaver froze beneath him. She tried to mask it with a smile, but he noticed. "What's wrong?" His voice was low, edged with suspicion. "Nothing," she whispered. But when his hand brushed her cheek, she flinched. A flicker of doubt clouded his expression. "You're nervous?" "Yes, nervous," she said quickly, her heart racing. The minutes stretched. He kissed her, but she stiffened again. The room seemed colder, the shadows heavier. David leaned back, studying her face, searching for an answer unspoken. "Elena," he said, slower this time. "There's something you're not telling me." Her lips parted, but words refused to come. The weight of confession pressed against her chest. She thought of the boy back in Mexico, the one her family had forbidden, the one who had taken what could never be returned. Her secret pulsed like a wound reopening. She began, but the sentence faltered. His jaw tightened. "You're not—" He stopped, narrowing his eyes. A storm brewed in the silence between them. Elena pulled the sheets up to her chin, trembling. She wanted to vanish into the walls, to escape the questions she knew were coming. "Tell me," he demanded, his tone no longer tender but sharp, commanding. Her hands shook as she whispered, "David, please, not tonight." The glass of champagne still fizzed on the bedside table, untouched. His gaze burned into her, dissecting every hesitation. The music of the wedding, the laughter of her family, felt a world away. He leaned closer, his voice cold. "I will know the truth." Her heart thudded like a drum. The secret she carried had not yet spilled, but the air was heavy with its scent, and David was already hunting for it. The next morning, as the sun pressed its pale light across Ashgrove, Daniel's story was once again summoned from the archives of memory. His wife had been gone for 3 years, but in the dusty drawers of the police department, her name lived on in a thin, battered file marked "Missing. Emily Rivers." The initial report was brief, almost cold. Daniel had walked into the station late in the evening, shoulders squared, his voice even. He told officers that Emily had stormed out after a heated argument about finances. She hadn't taken much, just her purse, her phone, and, he claimed, a change of clothes. He suggested she was staying with a friend, cooling off. His calm delivery was convincing enough that the officers logged it, stamped it, and sent him home with the reassurance that these things usually work themselves out. But the cracks appeared early. In his first interview, when asked what Emily had been wearing, Daniel paused too long, fumbling for an answer. Jeans, I think. Maybe a sweater. His eyes never settled, darting to the window, the clock, anywhere but the detective's gaze. By the second week, his indifference drew sharper suspicion. He didn't post flyers. He didn't call her friends. When a local news crew asked for a plea, Daniel declined, muttering that Emily was a private person who wouldn't want the drama. Detective Harris, who handled the case then, noted in his report, "Husband shows minimal distress. No evidence of searching. Speaks in generalities, avoids details. Gut feeling, something off." But without evidence of foul play, the file grew cold. In the years since, people remembered Emily less as a person and more as a question mark. But one woman refused to let her fade. Claire Donovan, Emily's closest friend. Claire had known Emily since high school, the kind of bond forged through whispered secrets, late-night phone calls, and unspoken loyalty. To Claire, Emily's disappearance was not the act of a woman seeking freedom, but the silencing of someone who had been trying desperately to be heard. She still recalled their final conversation, just days before Emily vanished. "Claire," Emily had whispered over the phone, her voice trembling. "I don't know how much longer I can stay here. He watches me all the time. It's like I can't breathe." Claire's response had been urgent, pleading. "Then leave. Come stay with me. You don't need to explain. Just don't wait." But Emily never arrived. In the police station transcripts, Daniel's words stood in stark contrast. "She's always been dramatic," he had told officers with a thin smile. "If she wanted to leave, she would. I can't stop her from being herself." The indifference chilled Claire more than anger would have. To her, it wasn't just a man resigned to his wife's absence. It was the performance of someone who already knew she wasn't coming back. In the small town, Daniel's image had split into two versions: the grieving, stoic husband for public view, and the controlling, dismissive man Emily had described behind closed doors. Claire saw only the latter, and each time she replayed their conversations, she grew more certain that Daniel's story was a carefully constructed act. On quiet nights, she would sit with Emily's old letters spread across her coffee table, reading them like a map of warning signs. The handwriting wavered in the later ones, each word a cry trapped on paper. Phrases like, "I feel trapped," and "he doesn't let me breathe," carved themselves into Claire's mind. The case may have been left to gather dust, but Claire refused to let Emily become just another forgotten file. She began making calls again. To the police, to neighbors, to anyone who remembered something unusual that night. And while most shrugged, tired of revisiting the past, Claire's persistence stirred faint ripples across the surface of Ashgrove's silence. What Daniel thought was buried was not gone. Claire's determination was just beginning. The street below was quiet, but her thoughts were not. She told herself she was being paranoid, that cities always had watchers and wanderers, people who seemed familiar until they melted into the crowd. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, she couldn't shake the sense that Paris, the city she had chosen for its promise of anonymity, was beginning to notice her. Paris taught Anya that even strangers could become confidants, if only for a night. It was a city that thrived on fleeting connections, on conversations whispered in cafes and forgotten by morning. Yet some of those encounters carved themselves into memory, lingering longer than they should. That was how she met Leah, a French student with messy blonde curls, chipped nail polish, and a laugh that seemed to tumble out without warning. They collided in the cramped aisle of a bookstore near Montmartre, both reaching for the same poetry collection. Instead of awkward silence, Leah teased, "Looks like we share good taste." It was the kind of line that might have dissolved quickly, but Leah lingered, and within minutes, they were talking as though they had always known each other. For Anya, Leah became a small anchor in a city that felt too wide, too indifferent. The two began meeting often, sometimes for long walks, sometimes for coffee, and eventually for wine. One evening they sat tucked in a dimly lit bar on Rue des Abbesses. A record spun in the background, low and soulful, the kind of music that encouraged confession. Their glasses clinked, crimson liquid catching the light, and for the first time since leaving India, Anya felt her guard lower. "Your French is getting better," Leah said with a grin, swirling her glass. "Barely," Anya laughed, cheeks warm from the wine. "People still answer me in English the moment I try." "Don't worry. Paris forgives mistakes if you charm it enough." The line made Anya smile, but behind her laughter was the weight of silence she had been carrying since boarding the plane. That silence cracked open as Leah leaned closer, her eyes bright with curiosity. "So, why Paris, really? You don't seem like someone running from nothing." The words struck deep. Anya hesitated, fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Leah's gaze was not prying but patient, the kind that waited for truths to surface. And Anya, vulnerable from loneliness and the comfort of red wine, let the words spill. She spoke of her family back home, the suffocating expectations, the whispered judgments of relatives. She revealed the broken engagement, a match made to please tradition rather than her own heart. She described how her refusal had been met with cold silence, with disappointment that clung to her like smoke. "I just couldn't do it," she whispered, eyes downcast. "Marry someone I didn't love. Stay in a life that wasn't mine. So I left." Leah reached across the table, covering her hand briefly. "That's brave, Anya. To choose yourself." The words soothed, but they also stung. Was it bravery or recklessness? She didn't know. Yet beneath the heaviness, another truth ached to be spoken. A truth she had not even admitted to herself fully. Her lips parted before she could stop them. "There's someone new." Leah's brows lifted, a slow smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, that didn't take long." Anya laughed nervously, shaking her head. "It's not like that. We don't really know each other. Not yet." She hesitated, glancing toward the shadowed corners of the... Jennifer had crossed the threshold. What began with playful texts had transformed into something far more dangerous. The first time they met outside the glow of their screens, it was under the pretense of coffee, a crowded cafe on the edge of town, far from familiar faces. She told herself it was harmless, two adults catching up. But when Michael leaned across the table, his hand brushing hers with casual ease, she felt her defenses dissolve. Their second meeting was not so innocent. Michael suggested a hotel, his tone light, as if offering a simple suggestion. Jennifer's heart pounded as she typed her agreement, her hands trembling so much she had to delete and retype the message twice. The room was bland, beige walls and stale air freshener, but the moment she closed the door behind her, the atmosphere changed. The weight of her choices crashed down, yet so did the hunger that had been building for weeks. His kiss silenced her doubts, his hands pulling her into a world she thought she had left behind in her youth. Desire surged, hot and consuming, and for those stolen hours, she was no longer a mother, no longer a wife, just a woman rediscovering a part of herself she had buried. That one meeting became 2, then 3. A pattern formed, dangerously rehearsed. Jennifer told David she was volunteering longer hours at the community center, or that she had errands across town. She became skilled at fabricating reasons, the lies slipping off her tongue smoother each time. Every rendezvous was a blur of intensity. She and Michael laughed between whispered touches, half drunk on the thrill of secrecy. He promised her the world in those dimly lit rooms, convincing her she was special, chosen. And Jennifer clung to his words, though the fear of being caught gnawed at the edges of her euphoria. At home, the cracks widened. David noticed her distance, her distracted eyes at Dinny. Her phone clutched too tightly when it buzzed. Jennifer brushed it off with tired excuses, blaming stress, headaches, or the endless list of chores. Yet, every lie left a residue of guilt that clung to her, thickening by the day. The children, too, began to sense the shift. "Mom, you're always busy," her daughter murmured one night as Jennifer hurried past her room with an unread bedtime story still on the nightstand. Jennifer froze at the door, guilt searing her chest, before forcing a smile and muttering, "Tomorrow, sweetheart." But she knew tomorrow would bring another excuse. Paranoia crept into her life like a shadow she couldn't shake. At the grocery store, she thought she saw one of her neighbors watching her too closely. At the gym, she flinched when a friend asked casually, "Where have you been lately?" Even at home, when David asked about her day, her pulse spiked, terrified that somehow he already knew. Still, the addiction to Michael grew. The risk seemed to heighten the desire, making every stolen moment sharper, more intoxicating. But at night, lying in bed while David's steady breathing filled the room, Jennifer's mind swirled with dread. She pictured whispers spreading through the neighborhood, David's face crumbling in betrayal, her children looking at her with eyes full of shame. The double life was unsustainable, and deep down she knew it. Yet she couldn't stop. Each meeting pulled her deeper, further from the woman she once was and closer to the edge of something irreversible. She told herself they were careful, that no one suspected. But already the lies were weaving into something larger, something she could no longer fully control. And in the silence after Michael left one afternoon, Jennifer caught her reflection in the hotel mirror. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar, flushed, exhilarated, yet haunted. For the first time, she wondered, and not just if they would be caught, but when. Raj sat hunched over the kitchen table, receipts and documents scattered around him like pieces of a shattered life. The folder of Emily's secrets lay open, its contents refusing to let him rest. His laptop glowed in the dim room, a low hum filling the silence. He wasn't searching aimlessly anymore. He was tracking, hunting. It was during one of these sleepless nights that a headline caught his eye. "Community fundraiser in Oklahoma City draws large crowds." The article itself was unremarkable, but the thumbnail image froze him in place. A woman stood at the edge of the crowd. Her face was turned slightly, but not enough to hide her profile. Raj's breath stopped. The sharp line of her jaw, the way her hair fell loose, brushed behind one ear in the exact absent-minded way Emily always did. Even her posture, shoulders slightly slouched, as if carrying an invisible weight, was painfully familiar. Raj's heart thundered. He leaned closer to the screen, enlarging the picture until the pixels blurred. "It can't be," he whispered. But the more he stared, the less room he had for denial. His grief-hardened memory of her face, the one he carried like a scar, aligned perfectly with the woman on the screen. Hope and dread crashed together in his chest. If this was Emily, then everything he had been feeling, fearing, and suspecting wasn't madness, it was truth. He scrolled through the article again, desperate for more images. Only one other photo featured her, an indistinct figure in the background, half hidden by others. Yet even there, he recognized her. The tilt of her head, the familiar tuck of hair behind her ear. Raj shut the laptop with a trembling hand, his reflection ghosting in the dark screen. "She's alive," he said aloud, voice breaking. "She's alive." But the words didn't taste of relief. They carried venom. If she was alive, then she hadn't died in that burning wreck. Shamaki. He had left him to grieve, to bury a ghost, while she built a life elsewhere. The questions swarmed, loud and unrelenting. Why Oklahoma? Who was she with? And most tormenting of all, why had she abandoned him so completely? Raj pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. He remembered her laugh, the softness in her voice during their first months together, the passion that once bound them tightly. But then came the late-night phone calls, the hollow excuses, the growing silence between them. The woman in Oklahoma wasn't the Emily he had loved. She was the Emily who had betrayed him. Still, he couldn't turn away. He needed confirmation. He reopened the laptop, freezing the blurry image once more. He studied her eyes, or at least what little he could make out. They weren't fully visible, yet something about them pierced him. A stranger's eyes in a familiar face. Raj whispered to himself, his voice raw. "I have to see her. I have to know." The decision hardened within him. This wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was obsession. He would follow the trail wherever it led, no matter how deep or dark. The glow of the laptop cast his face in pale light, his eyes burning with equal parts love and fury. Outside, the wind rattled against the window as though urging him forward. He closed the folder of receipts, packed it carefully, and slid it into his bag. The paper trail had led him to suspicion. Now a stranger's eyes had given him proof. Raj's obsession had a new fuel, the living ghost of his wife, of The letters had revealed Emily's secret life, but nothing prepared Claire, or the town, for what surfaced next. 3 years had passed since Emily's disappearance, and the Rivers house had grown weary under the weight of silence. Daniel still lived there, his routines sharp as clockwork, his presence both familiar and unsettling to neighbors who avoided his gaze. The property, however, was beginning to show its neglect, peeling paint, weeds along the driveway, and an unused water tank at the far end of the yard, rusted at the seams. That summer, Daniel finally hired a crew to clear the back lot. The men arrived with machinery, clattering tools, and the easy banter of strangers unconcerned with old ghosts. But within hours, their voices shifted from casual to uneasy. "Something's wrong with this tank," one of them muttered, waving a hand in front of his nose. The others approached cautiously. A sour odor seeped through the metal, thick and unmistakable. At first they thought it might be stagnant water, or perhaps a trapped animal. But as they pried the hatch open, the stench hit them with such force that one man staggered back, gagging. Inside, in the darkness where water should have been, there was something else, something wrapped, sealed, and horrifyingly human. The foreman snapped his phone open with trembling hands. "Call the police, now!" Within the hour, the yard swarmed with flashing lights and uniformed officers. Yellow tape stretched across the lawn as neighbors gathered in clusters at the edge of their driveways, whispering into cupped hands. Claire, who had been at home when her phone lit up with the news, rushed to the scene, her heart pounding. She arrived just in time to see the coroner's van pull up, the air heavy with dread. Officers moved with deliberate caution, prying open the tank fully. A hush fell over the crowd as the remains were lifted into the cab. Night air, the shape unmistakable even beneath the coverings. Emily had been found. The town erupted with disbelief. For 3 years, theories had spun like autumn leaves. She had run away. She had started over. She had vanished into nothing. But now, all the speculation collapsed into one undeniable truth. She had never left. She had been here all along, entombed in her own backyard. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, tears burning her eyes. It was both a moment of grim relief and unbearable sorrow. The forbidden truth she had pieced together in letters and whispers now had a body to anchor it, a final confirmation that Emily's voice had been silenced not by choice, but by violence. Reporters descended within hours, their cameras glaring against the dark sky. One shouted toward the police line, "Do you have a suspect? Is the husband under investigation?" The lead officer, his jaw tight, offered the only answer he could. "We are treating this as a homicide." Sunday-based. Inside the cordon, Daniel stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Some said he looked stunned, others thought he looked detached. To Claire, watching from the edge, it was something colder, resignation, as though the secret he had carried was finally too heavy to hold. An officer approached him. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us for questioning." Daniel's reply was measured, his voice steady. "Of course. I want to help however I can." But Claire remembered the calm in his first police interview 3 years earlier, the way he had shrugged at Emily's absence. She recognized it now for what it was, not composure, but calculation. The town's whispers grew into a roar. Mothers clutched their children closer. Neighbors replayed every sound they had ever heard from that house, every strange glance, every unexplained silence. Emily was no longer a mystery. She was a victim. And Daniel was no longer a grieving husband. He was a suspect. As the remains were loaded into the van, Claire closed her eyes. She could still hear Emily's words. "I think I'm getting out." But instead, he stumbled into the hallway, the echo of Mira's words chasing him into the night. Outside, the cold air slapped him. His knees threatened to give way, but his fury held him upright. He gripped the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles whitened, trembling with the knowledge that his world had collapsed in a single moment. In the quiet of his car, tears finally came, hot, violent, unstoppable. He had his proof. He had his answer. And with it came a darkness deeper than any he had ever known. Arjun drove home alone, the silence of the road pressing against his ears. The notebook lay waiting on the bedside table, each page now vindicated. Yet instead of relief, only rage lingered. Tonight was discovery. Tomorrow, it would be reckoning. Arjun didn't sleep after that night of discovery. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the shadows shifted with the dawn. Mira had returned hours later, avoiding his eyes, retreating silently into the bathroom. No words were exchanged, no apologies offered. The silence was heavier than any confession. His notebook lay open beside him, pages marked with trembling ink. The evidence was complete now. The betrayal was no longer suspicion. It was fact, raw and cruel. Yet proof brought no peace, only rage, pounding like a war drum in his skull. By the next evening, the fury had hardened into resolve. When Mira grabbed her gym bag again, claiming another late workout, Arjun followed. Not with hesitation this time, but with purpose. His mind was set. He needed answers, closure, or perhaps revenge. The gym glowed with sterile fluorescent lights. Music thumped faintly from the main hall, but the corridors toward the locker rooms were quieter, dimmer. Arjun's footsteps echoed as he approached. The bathroom door was shut this time, locked from within. Muffled voices leaked through. Mira's laugh, soft and familiar, tangled with Rohan's deeper tone. The sound ignited him. A match dropped into gasoline. Arjun slammed his fist against the door. "Mira!" A startled gasp inside. Shuffling. Then silence. "Open it!" His voice cracked with rage. The lock clicked hesitantly. Rohan's face appeared first, tense and defensive. "You need to leave, man. This isn't—" Arjun shoved the door wide. Mira stood behind Rohan, half-dressed, cheeks flushed with fear and shame. "Arjun, please," she started. "Don't you say my name," he snapped, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare!" The confrontation erupted in seconds. Rohan raised his hands, trying to calm him. "Look, it just happened. We didn't mean—" "Didn't mean?" Arjun's voice was venom. "You destroy my marriage, humiliate me, and you say you didn't mean?" Mira cried out, "Stop it, both of you!" But the red haze in Arjun's vision drowned her out. Months of doubt, humiliation, and longing surged all at once. He lunged forward, shoving Rohan against the tiled wall. The sound reverberated, a hollow crash that shook the room. "Arjun!" Mira screamed. Rohan swung back, fist connecting with Arjun's jaw. Pain shot through him, but it only fueled the fire. He tackled Rohan, both of them crashing into the counter, shattering the mirror above. Shards rained down like glass rain, glittering with the reflection of violence. "Stop!" Mira pleaded, trying to pull them apart. Her voice was raw, desperate but powerless against the storm. Arjun's hands found a jagged piece of glass. His grip tightened, blood seeping from his palm. Rohan struggled beneath him, eyes flashing with fear. "Think, man. This isn't worth it," Rohan gasped, voice breaking. But Arjun's thoughts were gone. Only betrayal remained. The storm outside still raged, but inside the Gledhill home, an even darker storm lingered. David sat slumped against the wall, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on the lifeless body sprawled across the floor. Jennifer's robe had fallen open slightly, revealing the bruises on her arms and the unnatural stillness of her chest. Her once vibrant eyes were now glassy, frozen in terror. The silence pressed down on him, suffocating. It was louder than her last scream, louder than the thunder rolling across the night sky. He pressed his hands to his ears as if he could block it out, but there was no escape from the weight of it. Upstairs, the soft creak of floorboards reminded him the children were asleep, their innocence still intact, their world unshattered. For now. He imagined their tiny footsteps padding down the stairs in the morning, their sleepy faces lighting up with questions. "Where's Mom?" The thought made his stomach churn. David buried his face in his hands, rocking slightly. His body trembled with the aftershocks of rage, now replaced by something far worse. Realization. He whispered to himself in fragments. No, this isn't real. She's just sleeping. She has to be. But when he lifted his head again, the truth remained unflinching. Blood streaked across the carpet. Her lips, once quick to argue or laugh, were parted in eternal silence. Denial crumbled into horror. His chest tightened, and tears spilled down his cheeks as a raw sob escaped his throat. He crawled closer to her, brushing the strands of hair from her face with shaking fingers. Her skin was already growing cold. "I didn't mean it, Jen. I swear I didn't mean it," he muttered, his voice breaking. "You pushed me too far, but I—" His words dissolved into a guttural cry. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and merciless. Each second felt like a hammer striking, counting down to a reckoning he called it. Couldn't avoid. He thought of calling the police, of confessing, of crumbling at their feet. But another thought crept in, poisonous and tempting. Escape. If he left now, if he drove far enough, maybe he could rewrite the story. He could vanish before anyone asked questions. But then his gaze drifted back upstairs. The children, his children. Could he abandon them? Leave them to grow up with the shadow of this night? The idea tore him in two. His mind fractured, ping-ponging between possibilities. He stood abruptly, pacing, clutching his head as if to squeeze the chaos out. Shadows from the broken lamp stretched grotesquely across the walls, making the house feel like a stranger's home. He opened the front door once, the cold rain splattering against his face. Freedom was just a step away, the night wide and open. But the weight of his soaked shirt, the blood drying on his hands, and the image of Jennifer's still body dragged him back inside. Closing the door, he leaned against it, chest heaving. I can't run. Not yet, he whispered. His eyes darted back to the living room. He thought of moving her body, of hiding it, but the very idea felt grotesque. Nothing could erase the scene carved into the walls and floors. The silence returned, oppressive, gnawing at him. He wanted her to scream again, even if in anger, just so he could believe she was still alive. But there was nothing, only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of thunder. David sank back to the floor beside her, his body folding in on itself. He pressed his forehead to his knees, rocking like a child, the silence of the house echoing louder with every passing moment. Upstairs, one of the children stirred in their sleep, a faint whimper breaking through the quiet. David's head jerked upward. Panic surged. The illusion of time had run out. The morning would come, and with it, questions no silence could answer. And outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. The click of the lock echoed like a gunshot. Raj stood trembling in the street, unable to distinguish truth from manipulation. Everything he thought he knew, about Emily, about himself, was dissolving. And in the void, something else began to grow. A dangerous certainty that if no one else would expose Emily's lies, he would. The days after Emily's confession blurred together, a haze of liquor and sleepless nights. Raj would sit in the dark of his rented room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey sweating on the table, his hands trembling as though poisoned. Every word she'd said replayed in his head, looping endlessly, digging deeper. You were never enough. I don't regret leaving. At first he told himself it was lies, twisted words meant to break him. But then the receipts, the absences, the late-night calls, all the scattered puzzle pieces, fit neatly into place. Her voice had been too steady, too practiced, for it to be invention. The truth, whether he wanted it or not, had crushed him. He began avoiding calls from friends. Messages went unread, voicemails deleted. The few who managed to reach him heard a slurred voice, impatient and volatile. I'm fine, he snapped more than once. Just leave me alone. But he wasn't fine. The walls around him felt like a cage closing in tighter each day. One evening, Arjun, his closest friend in the U.S., knocked at his door. Raj opened it reluctantly, the sour stench of alcohol seeping out. Arjun stared at him. Sunken eyes, unshaven face, shirt wrinkled and stained. Raj, what happened to you? Arjun asked softly. Nothing, Raj muttered, stepping back. Go home. Arjun didn't move. This isn't you. Emily is gone. Whatever she did, you can't drown in it. The words hit Raj like stones, but instead of grounding him, they scattered his fragile control. His chest heaved with anger. You don't understand. She's alive, Arjun. Alive and living like none of this mattered. I buried her in my soul while she was in someone else's arms. Arjun's face tightened with pity. Then let her go. You'll kill yourself if you don't. Raj slammed the door, his breath ragged, fury boiling under his skin. Let her go? How could he? She had staged her death, lied to him, stripped him of his sanity. If he let go, it meant admitting that his life had been nothing but her game. That night, he drove to her neighborhood. Parked on the corner, headlights off, he watched. Through his windshield, he saw her silhouette moving inside the house, her laughter faint through open windows. Another man's shadow crossed the light. They kissed in the kitchen as though the world was theirs to claim. Raj's fingers dug into the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His chest ached with something primal, rage mixed with longing, grief blended with obsession. He returned the next night, and the one after. Each visit lasted longer, each glimpse of her life twisting the knife deeper. He told himself he wasn't stalking. He was gathering truth, building a record of her lies. But in the silence of the car, he knew the truth. He couldn't stay away. Back in his room, the whiskey bottles multiplied. The mirror showed a stranger, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, shoulders hunched under invisible weight. He muttered to himself, fragments of Emily's words mixed with his own curses. She toyed with me. She lied to everyone. She thinks I'll just disappear. His obsession became oxygen. Without it, he couldn't breathe. Friends stopped trying to reach him. Work slipped through his fingers. He belonged only to the night now, to the streets outside Emily's new home. And somewhere, in the haze of grief and fury, a decision was forming, dark, unshakable. Raj had reached his breaking point. Daniel's mask began to crack the moment Maya's body was pulled from the river. For weeks, he had clung to a role he had crafted so carefully. The grieving partner, the man who claimed to have loved her but been powerless to stop her demons. Yet when detectives arrived at his door with a warrant in hand, the charm drained from his face. His arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No struggle, no dramatic protest, just the click of handcuffs and the low murmur of officers reading his rights. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispers spreading like wildfire. To them, Daniel had always been polite, even charming. But now they saw the hollow spaces in his performance, the edges of something much darker. In the sterile walls of the interrogation room, the façade collapsed further. Under harsh fluorescent lights, Daniel's rehearsed composure began to falter. He smirked, then grew defensive, then lashed out with sudden anger. "You don't understand," he snapped, fists tightening on the metal table. "She needed me. She was nothing without me." His words, meant as justification, only confirmed the picture the detectives were beginning to piece together. The questioning stretched for hours. Each time Daniel tried to pivot into charm, the detectives pushed back with evidence, bank withdrawals, phone records, fragments from Maya's journal, and finally, the necklace clutched in her hand. The sight of it seemed to unnerve him more than any accusation. His voice cracked, his carefully built armor fracturing into contradictions and half-truths. Outside that room, a larger narrative was unraveling. One by one, people from Daniel's past began to step forward. An ex-girlfriend described how he had once isolated her too, controlling her finances and cutting her off from friends. A former colleague recalled his temper, explosive outbursts followed by manipulative apologies. The stories were chillingly similar, echoes of Maya's silent suffering. Each testimony added another brushstroke to the portrait of a predator, revealing patterns that stretched back years. What had once seemed like charm was now unmasked as calculation. His gifts and affection were never free. They came with invisible chains. His laughter, his touch, even his promises were weapons wrapped in velvet. The women who once believed they had found love eventually realized they had been caught in a cycle of fear and dependence. Maya had not been the first. The question lingering over the investigation was whether she had simply been the last. The media seized on these revelations, headlines screaming of "a double life" and "the monster behind closed doors." His smiling photos, once the image of a respectable man, now carried a sinister weight. Commentators spoke of Love turned lethal, while survivors of similar abuse saw in Maya's story an echo of their own. For Priya, the pain deepened with each new revelation. She remembered Daniel's early visits, his soft-spoken charm, the way he had looked at Maya as though she were the only person in the world. Now those same memories twisted into horror, each gesture recast as a trap. "He fooled us all," she whispered, her grief laced with anger. "He fooled her most of all." As Daniel sat in his cell awaiting trial, stripped of his polished mask, the truth stood exposed. He was not a man who had simply lost control once. He was a man who had perfected control as a weapon. The cycle of manipulation, violence, and deceit had defined his relationships, and Maya had paid the ultimate price. But even as the portrait darkened, one haunting question remained. Would the court see him for who he truly was, or would his charm find one last audience to deceive? The stage was set for a reckoning. The days after Rosario's arrival passed in fragile quiet. David's suspicion sharpened, his watchfulness constant. He hovered around the house, muttering under his breath, drinking late into the night. Elena knew her mother's presence unsettled him, though he wore a mask of politeness when Rosario was near. But behind closed doors, his voice was sharper than ever. "Don't think she'll save you," he warned. "You're mine. Always." Rosario's pleading eyes said otherwise. Late at night, when David's snores rumbled through the house, mother and daughter whispered at the kitchen table. "You must go," Rosario urged. "Marisol will help. She's ready." Elena's childhood friend had already arranged a plan. A car waiting at the edge of town, cash hidden in a handbag Rosario had smuggled from Mexico, and a safe place to hide until they could decide the next step. Fear coiled in Elena's stomach, but resolve slowly bloomed. She could no longer ignore her mother's words, or the bruises that never seemed to fade. The night of the escape came wrapped in thick summer heat. The cicadas outside screeched as if warning of the storm to come. Rosario packed quietly, folding a few clothes into a bag. Elena tucked the police report into the pocket of her dress, a fragile shield of proof. Her hands trembled as she slipped on her shoes. "Are you ready?" Rosario whispered. Elena nodded, though her body shook. Every step toward the door felt like stepping toward both freedom and destruction. They crept through the darkened living room. The front door was only feet away. The car keys glinted in Rosario's hand. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears, and then the floorboard creaked. A shadow shifted in the hallway. David's voice cut through the darkness, low and venomous. "Going somewhere?" Elena froze, her body stiff with terror. David stepped forward, his face half lit by the glow of the porch light. Tea. His eyes blazed with fury, his hand gripping the doorway like a trap ready to spring. "You thought you could run?" His voice rose, echoing through the house. "David, please!" Elena's voice cracked. He lunged, grabbing her wrist, twisting it hard enough to draw a cry of pain. The bag dropped to the floor, spilling clothes across the tiles. Rosario stepped forward, desperation in her eyes. "Let her go!" she cried, striking at him with trembling hands. David shoved her aside, his focus locked on Elena. "You're not leaving me. Not alive." Something inside Elena snapped. She had spent months silenced, caged, terrified. But now, with her mother gasping on the floor, with freedom just beyond the door, she found her voice. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No more." She kicked hard, her foot connecting with his knee. He stumbled, cursing. Seizing the moment, Elena grabbed the lamp from the side table. The second time a lamp became her weapon, and swung it against his shoulder. The sound of impact rang out. David roared, but his grip faltered. Elena tore free, her breath ragged. "Run!" Rosario shouted. Elena snatched the keys, yanking open the door. The humid night air rushed against her face like a promise. Behind her, David staggered forward, blood at his temple, fury twisting his expression. "You'll regret this!" he screamed, voice cracking with rage. But Elena didn't look back. She dragged her mother with her, sprinting across the porch, fumbling with the keys until the car lights flared. Her heart thundered as she slid into the driver's seat, hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as she sped down the darkened street. David's shouts fading into the night. Narration slowed, heavy with finality. Elena's body ached, her face bruised, her wrists sore. Yet, as the house shrank in the rearview mirror, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She had broken free. Not unscarred, not unafraid, but free. The night swallowed her car, carrying her toward a future uncertain but her own. As the family departed, Claire remained, unwilling to let go just yet. She spoke aloud, not for anyone else, but for Emily and for herself. Betrayal, secrets, lies. They can hide for a while, but sooner or later they rise to the surface, just like you did. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Claire felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the faintest trace of release. When she finally stood, the cemetery lay quiet around her, the sky breaking just enough to let a shaft of pale light touch the headstone. Claire turned away, her steps heavy but resolute. Back at the Rivers property, demolition crews prepared to tear down the tank. Each clang of metal echoed like a warning to the town, a reminder of what had been hidden within. Though empty, it carried the weight of memory, the weight of Emily's silence, the weight of truth finally forced into the open. Ashgrove would never forget, and neither would Claire. As she walked toward her car, she whispered one final promise into the wind. "I'll carry your voice, Emily. Always." The tank groaned under the force of machinery, collapsing inward, its echo ringing across the fields like a final breath. And with that sound, the story of Emily Rivers was sealed, not in silence but in the haunting truth that no secret stays buried forever.